Healing your wounded inner child, the silent echoes of childhood. Have you ever felt a deep-seated ache you couldn't quite name? Invisible scars that don't bleed, yet profoundly shape every word you speak, every act of love, every flicker of trust, every reaction to pain. Many of these profound imprints, often ignored or forgotten, were forged when you were too young to speak, when the world felt like a safe haven, and adults seemed to hold all the answers. This video is for you if you still carry that silent burden and long to release it. Carl Jung, one of the 20th century's most brilliant minds, devoted his life to unraveling the intricate tapestry of the human psyche. He wasn't content merely observing the present. He delved into the origins, the most primal beginnings, back to childhood. There he unearthed a truth that could profoundly alter your life. Who you are today isn't solely a product of your conscious choices, but also of the child you once were. What you experienced, what you lacked, and what your very soul learned. To silence in order to survive. I urge you to stay until the end of this video. You won't just gain clarity on why trust feels elusive or why you unconsciously sabotage your happiness when it finally arrives. You'll discover how to truly heal these wounds. We're not talking about empty platitudes or magical cures. Here we'll use Jung's timeless wisdom as our compass, guiding you step by step from understanding to practical application, initiating a process of genuine transformation. You aren't broken, you are wounded, and there's a world of difference between those two states. Being broken suggests you're beyond repair, unusable, but being wounded signifies that healing is not only possible, it's your inherent right. Healing isn't about reliving past pain, but about revisiting those moments with the tools you possess today. It's about reclaiming the precious parts of yourself that became trapped in silence, confusion, abandonment, anger, or fear. Have you ever wondered why certain aspects of yourself feel beyond your control? Why do you react with anger when someone distances themselves, or why does an inexplicable sadness overwhelm you when you feel overlooked? Jung asserted that within every adult resides a child who remembers. And this inner child, though your conscious mind may have forgotten it, still holds unintegrated emotional memories, merely repressed. Today, we're going to acknowledge that child, not to judge, not to assign blame, but to recognize its presence. Because what remains unrecognized tends to repeat itself. Many of the conflicts you experience today in your relationships, your self-esteem, or your approach to the present aren't new errors. They are echoes of ancient wounds still festering within you. In the upcoming sections of this video, I'll guide you through a journey of profound insight. I'll illuminate the most common wounds that originate in childhood. Abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, injustice, and the denial of your individuality. With Carl Jung's teachings as our foundation, I'll help you give these wounds a name, a form, and, most importantly, a meaning. Jung believed that the keys to our healing lay hidden in the unconscious, and by bringing what was concealed into the light, we could reclaim the power we once surrendered out of fear, dependence, or the desperate need to survive. Childhood is where many shadows were born, but it can also be the place where you rediscover your light. It doesn't matter if you had an outwardly good childhood. A wound doesn't always stem from overt trauma. Sometimes it emerges from the thessalence, from a mother who was physically present but emotionally distant, a father who provided but never embraced, or a family that never yelled but also never truly listened. Wounds aren't always visible, but they are always transformable. What you'll learn in this video has the power to initiate your healing journey. I say initiate because healing isn't an instant act. It's a deep, intimate, continuous process. It's returning to the origin with respect, love, and compassion. And if you choose to embark on this journey into your past, guided by Jung's insights, you won't just transform your present. You'll liberate your future from repeating a past you didn't choose. No one ever taught us how to heal. We were taught to endure, to be strong, to ignore pain, and to get over it with phrases like, "It's in the past," or "That was years ago." But what the body doesn't forget, the soul doesn't either. And if your emotional reactions still speak with the voice of a wounded child, then it's time to act, because you don't deserve to live from a place of hurt. You deserve to live from a place of freedom. This isn't just another video. This is a safe space for your soul, a place where you can begin to look inward without fear, because you'll be accompanied. You'll have a guide. You'll know that you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you're not weak. You are human. And humans, as Jung taught, heal when they embrace their shadow and hold their inner child. I want to make you a promise, right now. If you stay, if you listen with an open heart, if you allow yourself to feel, to understand, to remember, then something within you will shift. Perhaps you won't notice it immediately, but in a few hours, a few days, when you react differently to something that once caused you pain, you'll realize that inner child is no longer so alone. What happened in your childhood was not your fault, but healing that part of you, that is your responsibility, because as long as you keep blaming others for your pain, you'll keep handing over your power. And this video, precisely, is designed to help you reclaim that power with a solid foundation, profound psychological wisdom, and exercises you can apply starting today. Carl Jung said there's no awakening of consciousness without pain, but he also said that unnecessary suffering vanishes when you stop resisting what happened and begin to integrate it. Today, we're going to stop resisting. Today, we're going to illuminate what still aches, and in that act, you'll discover a new way to walk through life, freer, stronger, and more authentically you. This video holds immense value, not because it tells you what to think, but because it invites you to think with yourself, to engage in a dialogue with who you were, to permit yourself to cry if needed, but also to celebrate when you recognize yourself for the first time in a long time. And that is worth more than any external success. I propose something to you. Don't listen with just your mind. Listen with your soul. Don't rush to understand everything. Simply stay here, remain, feel, breathe. Allow yourself to hear the story you forgot to tell, because your story needs to be heard, even if only by you. The words you're about to hear aren't meant to point fingers, but to help you reclaim your emotional responsibility. They aren't meant to victimize you, they're meant to empower you with tools. Because when you understand why you react the way you do, you start to have options. And right there, precisely there, your freedom is born. Jung taught us that everything we deny within ourselves manifests externally as fate. In other words, what you don't heal, you repeat. And if you don't repeat it, your children, your partners, and your relationships will inherit it. This video, therefore, isn't just for you. It's for those around you and for the future versions of yourself who deserve a lighter life. This process might be painful, but don't fear. The pain that heals is different from the pain that destroys. The first cleanses, transforms, and brings order. And here, together, we'll journey through that pain with love, with awareness, with compassion, so that when you look back, you can say, "It's healed, because I finally understood." Healing childhood isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with consciousness. It's looking at the child you were and telling them, "You are no longer alone. Now I will take care of you." And that, though it may seem small, can change your entire life. Because when the inner child feels seen, the adult can finally rest. By the time you finish this video, you will not only have understood how to heal the wounds of your childhood, but you will also have learned to honor what you've lived through, without it continuing to dictate your life. You'll learn to release without forgetting, to forgive without justifying, and to reconstruct yourself without losing your essence. Carl Jung stated, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This quote is the compass with which we'll navigate this path, because many of the decisions we make today, the relationships we choose, and the emotions that overflow without explanation are expressions of parts of us that continue to operate from an unconscious corner, unacknowledged and unhealed. Wounds and their whispers. Understanding core patterns. Healing childhood wounds, according to Jung, begins by bringing them into the light of consciousness. The first major wound we'll explore is abandonment. This can arise not only from the physical absence of a parental figure, but also from emotional absence. A parent can be present and yet not truly see us, not listen to us, and not connect with our inner needs. Jung taught us that a child who wasn't seen in their essence grows up feeling they must do something to earn love. This is the root of many codependent relationships in adulthood. Try this exercise right now. Close your eyes for a moment and recall a situation in your childhood where you needed comfort but didn't receive it. How old were you? Where were you? What did you need to say? Allow yourself to feel that moment without judgment. Then write in the comments, "Today I recognize that I needed," and complete the sentence. This exercise opens the door to dialogue with your inner child. Another profound wound is that of humiliation. This occurs when during our childhood we were exposed, compared, ridiculed, or punished for showing vulnerability, for crying, for being scared, or for seeking attention. Jung said, "The soul suffers when it is compelled to deny its nature." Every time we were taught that feeling was wrong, a part of our soul fragmented. Healing this wound means reclaiming the dignity that was stripped away from us when we were barely learning to exist. The wound of betrayal arises when a figure who should have protected us breaks our trust. This could be an unkept promise, a betrayed secret, or even a gesture that shattered our emotional security. Jung explained that the shadow is constructed from those experiences we repress to avoid suffering, and betrayal often forces a child to suppress their desire to trust. In adulthood, this manifests as hyper-control, chronic distrust, and difficulty delegating. Ask yourself, do you remember a promise that was made to you but never kept? What part of you withered that day? Write a letter, don't send it to that personas. If you were 5 years old again, don't censor yourself, just write. After you finish, read it aloud, allow yourself to cry if you need to. This letter isn't for the other person, it's for you. It's your way of telling yourself that what you experienced was real. The fourth wound is injustice. This emerges when the environment was authoritarian, cold, or inflexible, when we were pressured to be perfect, when we weren't allowed to fail, play, or make mistakes without punishment. Jung famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that darkness often begins in childhood, when we're forced to repress what's spontaneous and natural to fit into molds that were never truly ours. Sometimes the wound doesn't have a specific scene. It's diffuse, made up of small omissions, of gazes that weren't there, of hugs that never came. Jung spoke of the divine child we all carry within us. But this divine child, when not nurtured, becomes a forgotten figure, buried by the functional adult who smiles on the outside and cries within. Healing means retrieving it, bringing it out of exile, and asking, "What do you need from me today?" Do this now. Find a photograph of yourself from childhood. Look at it for a few minutes. Observe your eyes, your posture, and your energy. Then, write in your journal or the comments, "Today I promise you that," and complete that promise with what you need to give yourself: time, respect, rest, care, and love. It's a pact, and pacts with yourself, when honored, begin to mend what others broke. The fifth wound is the denial of individuality. Jung deeply believed in the process of individuation, that soul journey towards authenticity. But many of us grew up in environments where being different was penalized, where our ideas were invalidated, and where our creativity was corrected before it could blossom. And what did we do then? We adapted. We became what was expected, and in that act we lost our true shape. Think now. What things did you do as a child that you later abandoned to please others? Did you draw, dream of something, have strange ideas that made you quiet down? The child who was forced to fit in becomes the adult who forgets who they are. And Jung was clear. Being yourself is the most terrifying and also the most liberating thing you can do. Reclaiming that essence is a core part of the healing process. Many adults today carry a chronic anguish they can't explain. They sleep poorly, they feel empty and fear abandonment without apparent reason. And do you know why? Because their inner child is still waiting to be rescued. Jung said that healing isn't about changing the past, it's about re-signifying it. And re-signifying is returning, to observe with new eyes and choosing to act differently. Let's do something right now. I want you to close your eyes and visualize an empty room. Inside, it is the child you once were. They are sitting, waiting. Approach them in your mind. Sit beside them. Don't say anything, just embrace them. Say, with your presence, I am here. This simple image can open an emotional channel so profound that the mere visualization becomes a reparative act. Do this every night for 7 days. Observe how it changes the way you speak to yourself. Jung didn't teach us to heal linearly. He spoke of cycles, of symbols, of dreams, of looking beyond visible behavior to find the truth behind the mask. Because yes, we all wear masks. And often these masks are legacies of childhood. The mask of the strong one, the funny one, the perfect one, or the savior. But what lies behind that mask? When you manage to remove that mask for a moment and allow yourself to be vulnerable, confused, and authentic, something within you rests, and in that rest, healing begins. Healing isn't about doing more, it's about releasing the effort of being what you never were. Jung said that each of us must find our path, and that's why what we offer here isn't a set of recipes, but tools, invitations, and doors. But the decision to enter is yours, and every door you walk through brings you a little closer to yourself. Now, I want you to do this exercise in the comments. Complete the sentence. Today, I choose to stop carrying, and write whatever no longer belongs to you. Others' expectations, inherited guilt, imposed masks, traumas that aren't yours. Writing it down is the first step to releasing it. Reclaiming your power. From wound to wisdom. Every wound you carry from your childhood can become a source of power if you choose to traverse it with consciousness. Jung explained it masterfully. There is no transformation without pain. But he also said, the encounter with oneself is the most lonely, but also the most enriching of all. You are here because you are ready. Perhaps you didn't know it, but you are ready to stop looking outward and start looking inward. And this video is just the beginning. Your childhood wounds don't define you, they reveal you. And when you learn to see them clearly, they stop controlling you. They become part of your story, not your prison. If this video has resonated with you, if something within you has awakened, leave the phrase, "Today, I choose to embrace my inner child," in the comments. Do it with pride, with strength. Let that comment not just be a phrase, but your declaration of a new beginning, your cry of consciousness, your first step towards emotional freedom. Carl Jung knew that the human soul isn't healed by theories, but by symbols. That's why he introduced the concept of the self as a totality that goes far beyond the ego. For Jung, healing childhood wounds didn't simply mean feeling better, but integrating the fragmented parts of the soul into a unified consciousness, where there's no longer a division between who you are and who you think you should be. What hurts isn't just what was done to us, but what we decided that meant about ourselves. A child who was abandoned doesn't just feel pain from the absence, but forms a conclusion. I'm not valuable enough for them to stay. This interpretation settles in as an internal truth, and from there it builds future relationships. Jung insisted that true healing wasn't just emotional, it was cognitive and symbolic. It's questioning what we believe about ourselves because of what we were led to believe. One of Jung's most powerful concepts is the archetype of the wounded child. He didn't see it as a mere metaphor, but as a living reality in the collective unconscious. We all carry within us this child who once was, who still dreams, who still hopes, who still fears. And as long as that child isn't heard, the wound remains active, even if the adult dresses in clothes of success or masks of independence. Have you ever wondered why you sabotage yourself precisely when something is going well? Why you distance yourself from those who love you? Why do you flee when someone gets too close? Jung would explain it this way: because your inner child still doesn't believe that love is safe, because the wound hasn't understood that it's no longer necessary to protect itself. The unconscious doesn't obey time, it obeys unresolved emotion. That's why we repeat patterns, not out of stubbornness, but out of loyalty to the trauma. Freud, though his view was more centered on infantile sexuality, also understood that the early years were crucial. But Jung went further. He didn't just analyze events, but also what they symbolized. He said that the symptom is the language of the soul when it hasn't been heard. So your anxiety, your fears, and your disproportionate reactions aren't flaws, they are messages. And if you listen to them, they will liberate you. When you start to look inward, you begin to discover that many of your strongest emotions aren't adult ones. They are emotional, but from another time. They are the echo of an emotion that got trapped in a small body, in a memory without words. Jung said, everything we don't confront in consciousness becomes destiny. That's why childhood doesn't truly end until it's been fully examined. The wounds of childhood have a silent ally, the complex. Jung developed the concept of emotional complexes to explain why certain situations trigger us with such intensity. It's not just that someone isn't listening to you, it's that when they don't, it activates a complex of invalidation that became fixated in your childhood. The adult feels the rejection of the present, but the child of the past is the one reacting. Alfred Adler, a colleague and later a dissenter of Freud, also recognized that childhood creates life scripts. For Adler, perceived inferiority in childhood leads us to construct a compensatory lifestyle. That's why many seek success, not out of self-love, but to cover a wound of worthlessness. Jung would say that success without the integration of the inner child becomes hollow, because external achievements can never truly heal what was damaged within. Donald Winnicott offered something essential. A child doesn't need a perfect mother. They need a good enough mother. This means wounds don't just come from major traumas, but from repeated emotional absences, from a lack of authentic connection. Many people feel guilty for having had a good childhood and still carrying deep wounds. Jung would tell you it's not about what happened, but how your soul interpreted it. Jung also gifted us with the concept of the individuation process, a journey that begins when you decide to stop being what others expect of you and start being yourself. And this path inevitably involves healing the inner child, because you can't build a solid identity on unintegrated fragments. The true adult emerges when the wounded child is heard and transformed into a source of wisdom. One of the most impactful moments of inner work occurs when we stop blaming. When it's no longer about finding external culprits, but about reclaiming power from within. Jung said, "Guilt is not transformative, but responsibility is." That's when you stop living from the wound and start living from choice. Healing is that moment when, without justifying the past, you decide that your future belongs to you. The journey inward, unmasking your true self. The most silent wound is the one hidden behind the facade of everything's fine. It belongs to those who learn to survive by being the strong ones, the responsible ones, the mature ones. But behind that persona, there's often a child who felt forced to carry the weight of others. Jung called this an inflation of ego, a mask of strength that conceals a deeper need. And this mask, sooner or later, will crack if it's not healed. One of the most potent exercises for this is to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and say aloud, "I no longer need to prove anything to be worthy of love." At first, it might feel absurd, but keep repeating it because your subconscious needs to be reprogrammed. It needs to hear what it has never heard. You need to stop living conditioned by wounds that no longer define who you are today. Jung was a visionary because he didn't compartmentalize the human being. He understood that body, mind, emotions, symbols, and spirituality form a totality. That's why healing childhood isn't just about understanding what happened. It's about reintegrating the lost parts of the soul. It's about dreaming again, playing again, saying what was silenced and feeling without fear. And you know what? It's not too late. It doesn't matter if you're 20, 30, 40, or 60. The inner child has no age, and as long as it's wounded, it will ask for your help in 1,000 ways, through destructive relationships, chronic dissatisfaction, and inexplicable anxiety. But if you decide to listen to it, to take it by the hand, your life will begin to move in a different direction. Jung also spoke of dreams as the language of the soul. We often dream of lost children, old houses, and dead-end roads. What if these dreams are messages from the child you once were? What if instead of ignoring them, you started to write them down, to give them form, to converse with them? Healing also means interpreting your life as a symbol, not just a sequence of events. Childhood leaves internal codes, and Jung believed that art, drawing, and writing were tools for channeling them. When was the last time you painted without judging yourself or wrote without correcting yourself? Do it, not to show anyone, but to speak with yourself, because sometimes the child's voice doesn't come out in words, but in colors, in shapes, in symbols that bypass the adult's judgment. What we fear most is often not remembering the wound, but what we did to survive it. The masks we adopted, the ways we closed off our hearts, and the attitudes that now distance us from what we truly desire. But Jung said, to know oneself is to accept that we are both light and shadow. Healing isn't about becoming someone better. It's about accepting everything you are, even what you tried to hide. You don't have to keep dragging around the story you were told. You can write a new one. But to do that, you must pause, look back, and speak to that part of you that still cries in silence. Because the functional adult can't move forward if the inner child is still screaming. Jung stated clearly, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that, in essence, is this process. A journey home, an embrace of the past. Not to stay there, but to rescue what you forgot. Your tenderness, your spontaneity, your authenticity, your capacity to love without fear. When you heal the child you were, you begin to inhabit life with greater depth, and that is freedom. Often, behind an addiction to approval, hides a child who just wanted their parents to see and acknowledge them. This need, when unresolved, becomes a constant search for external validation. Jung masterfully explained it. The ego becomes an empty construct if it is not rooted in the self. What you seek externally, if not cultivated internally, turns into emotional dependency. In relationships, these wounds manifest powerfully. You might attach too quickly or pull away when you feel loved, or repeatedly choose partners who are cold, controlling, or inaccessible. It's not by chance. You're unconsciously repeating the relationship patterns of your childhood to try and resolve what you couldn't back then. Jung called this the eternal return of the unhealed trauma, a cycle that's only broken with consciousness. And deep self-compassion. It's crucial to differentiate between an intellectual understanding of the wound and its emotional integration. Many people can explain their past, but still react as if they're living it. Jung believed that true change occurs when the body and soul feel safe enough to release their armor, and this safety doesn't come from understanding everything, but from starting to trust yourself in the present. The wound also hides in the body. Jung, even though psychosomatics were only intuited in his time, knew this. Today, we understand the body expresses what hasn't been released. The stomach clenches what wasn't digested, the throat constricts what wasn't said, and the skin reflects self-rejection. That's why healing childhood also means reconnecting with your body, listening to it, breathing and inhabiting it with love. Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, wrote, "Man is willing to endure anyhow if he has a why." Applied to our wounds, this means we can transcend pain if we find meaning. And Jung agreed, healing isn't just relief, it's transformation with purpose. Your pain can become wisdom, your past a service, and your wound a path. When the inner child feels loved by the adult you are today, life becomes lighter. Relationships stop being battlegrounds. Emotions cease to be enemies. Your mistakes become teachers, and your story, which once weighed you down, turns into a testament. Jung would say that at this moment, you've crossed a sacred threshold, that of your true inner life. Often, behind perfectionism, there's a child who just wanted approval, who believed that if they did everything right, no one would abandon them. Jung identified this pattern as a dissociation of the true self. The child becomes a character to survive. The adult lives exhausted from acting. Healing means allowing yourself to be imperfect without fear, to be loved for who you are, not for what you do. When you start giving yourself what you didn't receive, you break an ancestral chain. It's not just for you, it's for the generations that came before you and those that will come after. Jung said that the soul isn't individual, it's connected to a collective unconscious. Healing your childhood has a silent but powerful impact on your entire lineage. It starts with you, but it doesn't end with you. If you've reached this point, it's not by chance. It's your soul knocking at the door. It's your inner child saying, it's time. It's time to live differently, to breathe without fear, to love without masks, and to build yourself from compassion. Carl Jung would be proud of you because you are doing the hardest work, but also the most important, reuniting with yourself. The inner architect, Elias's journey of transformation. That night, as the Bogotá sky wept with a soft, persistent rain, Elias wandered aimlessly along Carrera Septima. The drops streamed down his face, but he didn't know if it was water or if he had finally allowed himself to cry. For days, he hadn't slept well. For months, he'd felt out of place. For years, he'd carried a silence that was beginning to scream inside him. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to live like this anymore. Elias was 37, an architect, one of those who designed beautiful things for others while living in internal ruins. To the outside world, everything seemed orderly, a good job, an apartment in Chapinero Alto, occasional travels, and a successful life. But something inside him was crumbling, and no matter how much he tried to ignore it, the crack grew deeper. It all started a few months ago when his boss, without warning, accused him of a mistake he hadn't made. The injustice churned within him, not because of the fact itself, but because of how he froze, paralyzed, unable to defend himself. That night, he couldn't sleep. He didn't understand why his body reacted with a mix of anger, sadness, and fear. He didn't understand why he felt 10 years old again. He went to therapy on his sister's recommendation. "Just do it, even if you don't understand why," she urged. The therapist was a serene woman with a gentle yet penetrating gaze. In their third session, she asked, "How old were you when you stopped crying?" That question undid him. He didn't know how to answer. He simply bowed his head, and inside, something shattered. He began to remember fragments of his childhood he'd kept locked away in an unopened box. The childhood home in Suba, the smell of soup on Sundays, the chill of mornings without hugs. His mother was functional but distant. His father, completely absent. The times he'd needed comfort and only received silence. The days he'd locked himself in the bathroom to cry, unseen. That's where it all began. That's where his wound was born. His therapist spoke of Carl Jung, of the shadow, of the inner child. She explained that he wasn't broken, but fragmented. That what he was experiencing wasn't weakness, but an invitation to rediscover himself. And that until he healed this part of him, he would continue to feel incomplete, insecure, and disconnected. It was the first time anyone hadn't tried to fix him but to understand him. He began to have recurring dreams. In one, he walked through a dark forest, carrying a lantern that wouldn't light. He felt fear. Suddenly, he saw a child sitting among the trees. It was at 7 years old, alone and trembling. He wanted to approach, but the child ran away. He would wake up with his heart pounding. His therapist explained that this child represented his original wound, and it was time to seek it out in real life. One day, driven by something he couldn't explain, he returned to his old neighborhood. He walked through the narrow streets, past his old school, and arrived at the house where he grew up. It was painted a different color and had new fences, but still held the same energy. He stood before it for several minutes, breathing deeply, feeling a mix of nostalgia, fear, and a desire for reconciliation in his chest. That night, he wrote a letter. He addressed it to his childhood self. He asked for forgiveness for abandoning him, for forcing him to be strong, for silencing so much. He promised that from that day forward, he would be with him. This letter was the beginning of something new, something he didn't know how to name, but that felt profoundly true. He started noticing small changes. He no longer demanded so much of himself. He allowed himself to say no for the first time. In years, he stopped replying to messages immediately. He started meditating in the mornings. He bought a soft blanket, hugged himself, and every night before falling asleep, he placed his hand over his chest and silently repeated, "I'm with you, little Elias." His dreams began to shift. The forest wasn't so dark anymore. The child no longer ran away. Sometimes he'd look Elias in the eyes with curiosity. In one of the most powerful dreams, they walked together, not speaking, just walking. And upon waking, Elias felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. His therapist simply said, "You're doing well, you're integrating." But not everything was linear. There were days of relapse, days when he hated himself for being so sensitive, days when he felt ridiculous for crying alone in his car, and days when he doubted everything. But something had changed. He no longer fled these difficult days. He moved through them, lived them. He knew that being part of the healing process meant touching the bottom to find its root. One rainy afternoon, he received a call from his mother. It had been years since they had truly talked. She asked if she could visit him. When she arrived, Elias noticed his mother had aged. She was no longer the distant woman of his childhood, but a tired, elderly woman with a fragile voice. They talked, and for a bit, and at one point she said, "Forgive me if I didn't know how to give you what you needed." He didn't respond. He just looked at her and understood that forgiveness doesn't always come with words. After that visit, he wrote in his journal, "I don't need the past to change. I just need to stop living from it." And that phrase became his mantra. Every time he felt himself slipping, he repeated it, and something within him recentered. Jung was right. The wound can be the place where the light enters. He met someone. It wasn't an ideal love story, but it was different. For the first time, he didn't try to impress, adapt, or hide his sensitivity. He told her from the beginning that he was in a healing process, and she didn't flee. She listened, supported him, and looked at him with respect. This relationship didn't complete him. It accompanied him. And that was more valuable than any fairy tale. One night, walking through Zona T, he passed a bookstore and felt an impulse to enter. He picked up a book at random, Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. He opened to a page that read, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." A knot formed in his throat. He bought the book, read it cover to cover in a week, and confirmed he was on the right path. In a therapy session, his therapist remarked, "You've stopped acting like the wounded child and started becoming the adult that child needed." This statement profoundly impacted him, because for the first time, he realized he wasn't just healing for himself. He was building a new way of living for his emotional lineage. He began to share his process with others, not intending to teach, but simply to share his story. And he discovered something powerful. When you dare to show your wounds from a place of acceptance, others also begin to heal, as if your sincerity broke a chain of collective silence. Jung said that the encounter with oneself transforms those around you, and Elias was proving it. It was no longer about closing a wound. It was about opening a new path. A path where pain wasn't an enemy, but a guide, where the past wasn't a prison, but a bridge, where the wounded child no longer needed to hide, but could play, live, create, love, and breathe. The alchemy of pain. Elias's breakthroughs and Sun. Ultimately, Elias's story is a perfect reflection of how Jung's teachings come to life when someone dares to look inward. His process wasn't linear or glamorous. It was human, vulnerable, chaotic at times, but profoundly authentic. And in that emotional chaos, light began to emerge, because, as Jung taught, there is no awakening of consciousness without pain. The first essential element of his process was the overflowing emotional symptom. That crisis at work was the trigger. Often we think we're struggling because something external is out of whack, but in reality, the external merely activates the internal. Elias didn't fall apart because of his boss's complaint, but because that injustice triggered an unhealed emotional memory, abandonment, invisibility, and the feeling of being unable to defend himself as a child. The paralysis Elias felt in that scene is highly significant from a Jungian psychological perspective. Jung spoke of the emergence of the complex when a present event triggers an unconscious cluster of repressed emotions, images, and beliefs. Elias didn't react as a 37-year-old adult. He reacted from the part of himself that was still a confused child. This is common when childhood wounds haven't been integrated. Going to therapy marked the beginning of his journey toward himself. Jung said that self-knowledge is one of the most difficult tasks for a human being because it requires the courage to see what has been avoided for years. His therapist didn't offer him magical solutions, but profound questions, inviting him to feel, not just to understand. And that's where all true therapeutic processes begin. The key question, when did you stop crying, isn't just poetic, it's diagnostic. Many people stop crying not because they've healed, but because they've learned to emotionally numb themselves. This emotional cutoff marks the beginning of internal disconnection. And when we disconnect from pain, we also disconnect from deep pleasure, love, and joy. The reunion with his childhood is an essential point in Elias's therapy. Jung affirmed that within every adult is a child who holds the purest meaning of who we are. Healing isn't about reverting to childhood, it's about rescuing that child from emotional abandonment. Elias did this by writing to him, visualizing him, dreaming about him, and giving him an emotional space in his present. His dreams are another key element. Jung considered dreams the direct language of the unconscious. The forest, the darkness, and the child who flees are universal symbols. They represent the shadow, the unintegrated, what hasn't yet been embraced. And the evolution of these dreams, from the child who flees to the child who walks with him, is evidence that his unconscious is beginning to heal. The letter to his inner child was a profoundly reparative act. In therapy, this exercise is called reparenting internal dialogue. It's a way to break the silence imposed in childhood and begin to offer the child what they never had: presence, listening, and unconditional love. It's not about writing well. It's about speaking from the soul. The small changes in his daily life are proof that healing doesn't only happen in grand events, but in the details: saying no, allowing himself to rest, spending time with himself, and stopping the constant rush. Jung spoke of the cultivation of individuation as a slow, progressive, and deeply intimate path. Every daily decision that honors your inner truth is a step towards integration. Elias began to inhabit his body. He bought a soft blanket, touched his chest, and hugged himself. These seemingly small gestures have an immense impact on the nervous system and the unconscious. The body stores unprocessed emotions, and when you begin to inhabit it with tenderness, something within you stops being in a state of alert. The relapses Elias experienced are completely natural. Healing isn't a straight staircase, it's a spiral. There are days of progress and days of setbacks. The key is not to judge yourself for it. Jung taught that the shadow returns cyclically to be integrated at new levels. You're not failing if you feel pain again. You're deepening if you allow yourself to feel it without fleeing. The encounter with his mother was a turning point, not because she apologized, but because Elias no longer needed an apology to heal. Jung said that forgiveness doesn't always come from the other. Sometimes it comes from you, for you. When you stop demanding reparation and begin to build reconciliation with yourself, peace becomes internal, not dependent on external factors. The loving relationship he started marked a new pattern of connection. Elias stopped seeking saviors or people to save. He began to show up from his vulnerability. This is the greatest sign of emotional maturity, loving from truth, not from emptiness. Jung would say this is a sign that the ego no longer dominates, but the self begins to guide. The book he found by chance also became part of the therapeutic process. Jung taught that when the soul is ready, the symbols arrive. That book, that page, and that sentence were mirrors of his transformation. Therapy doesn't just happen in the consultation room, it happens in every encounter that reflects you, in every word that names you, and in every sign that tells you you are on the right path. His journal became an emotional container. Jung recommended writing as a tool for integration. Writing what you feel without filters, without correction, without judgment, is like building a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. Elias wasn't just healing when he wrote. He was finding himself. He was giving himself existence. The process of healing he underwent wasn't about changing his past, but about re-signifying it. Jung said that what you deny enslaves you. What you accept transforms you. Elias didn't need things to have been different. He needed to look at his story with new eyes, with eyes of compassion. In that gaze, the past stops being a prison and becomes mastery. This process also impacted his surroundings. As he became more authentic, his relationship shifted. Some people drifted away, others approached with greater depth. Jung explained this as a readjustment of the psychic field. When you change, the entire system changes, and while it sometimes hurts, this change is necessary for your new self to have space to exist. The most powerful thing is that Elias began to share his story without pretension, without seeking the spotlight, just with honesty. And this is part of the therapeutic journey. When you dare to show your scars from a place of acceptance, you don't just heal yourself. You open paths for others. The transformed wound becomes a bridge, your path to liberation. After everything you've heard, felt, and journeyed through with Elias, I want to ask you a question that might seem simple, but holds the power to transform your life from its root. Have you been the adult your inner child needed? Don't answer immediately. Breathe. Look inside. Observe your decisions, your silences, your burdens. What part of you is still waiting to be embraced? What emotions do you still avoid for fear of feeling too much? Jung taught us that the greatest act of transformation doesn't happen externally, but within the soul. But the question remains, knocking at the door of your consciousness. Have you truly listened to yourself deeply? What if all your current discomfort is merely the echo of a child who still hasn't been validated? What if your anxiety, your perfectionism, your irrational fears are, in reality, the voice of your inner child, simply asking to be seen, not corrected? Jung believed that the unconscious isn't our enemy, but a teacher who won't stop speaking until we listen. Imagine for a moment that you sit before your 5-year-old self. What would you say to them? Would you judge them? Would you rush them to heal? Or would you simply take them in your arms and say, "It's okay now, I'm here"? That little one still lives within you. They haven't gone anywhere. They've just hidden, waiting for your heart to become a safe place. The question is it safe now? Have you noticed how many of your decisions are born more from fear than from freedom? Jung would say you're still bound by patterns created at a stage when you didn't have the resources to defend yourself. But today, you do. Today, you have awareness. You have words. You have tools. So I ask you, how much longer will you let an old version of yourself dictate your present? Think about your story. Do you truly know it, or do you only remember the chapters that hurt? What parts of yourself do you hide so others will accept you? How much space do you give your vulnerability? Do you allow yourself to cry, or do you still see it as weakness? Jung was very clear. What you resist persists, but what you accept transforms. What are you willing to accept today? I invite you to stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What purpose does this still serve in me?" This is one of the keys to the Socratic method, replacing complaint with inquiry, judgment with curiosity, because when you ask with love, the answers emerge from the depths, and that's where true change begins. Now that you've watched this video in its entirety, I invite you to leave the following phrase in the comments. Let it be a silent commitment to yourself, a promise that springs from the deepest part of your being. Today, I begin to heal myself from love, not from the wound. Write it, not for us, but for yourself. So it's etched in your history that today was a different day, a day when you chose to look inward with courage. And if you've made it this far, I want you to know something very important. You are brave, you are worthy of love, and your process matters. No one knows what hurt you more than you, but no one can give new meaning to it more than you either. Remember always, there is no path more sacred than reconciling with yourself. And although no one can walk it for you here, you are accompanied. Finally, if this journey has resonated with you, if something has awakened within you, if you finally feel you have a starting point, I invite you to delve even deeper into your process. The path towards self-love, inner healing, and true emotional freedom is not meant to be walked alone. If you found this content valuable, you'll want to see our next video, subscribe to our channel, Psychosophy, comment, and join people who are transforming their lives. And if this video inspired you, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this today.